World of Tanks is known for featuring some legendary tanks, and sometimes tanks that never truly existed. 60 TP. Today we dive into the Swedish medium tanks. Are they based on real blueprints, or are they pure wargaming fiction? First up, the Leo. Developed in 1945 after discussions around modernizing the Stridsvagn M42 began, it was considered that the Stridsvagn M42 was obsolete, and that aside from plans to upgrade it, 2 new vehicles would be planned, weighing around 30 tons. The first one would be a new medium tank. The second would be a new tank destroyer conceptually, similar to the PVK M43. The discussions in 1945 concluded that this new medium tank would be armed with a 7.5 cm gun with a muzzle velocity of at least 1000 meters per second, or a 10 cm gun with a muzzle velocity around 850 meters per second. It was also noted that the turret should have sloped sides and, if possible, cast in a dome shape. The armor of this tank would be estimated around 70mm front, 35mm in the side and 30mm in the rear. In 1946 it was decided that the second vehicle, the tank destroyer, would be based on the same chassis as the 30-ton medium, and in the same year a lighter 25-ton version was proposed. The chassis for these vehicles was intended to be fast with a top speed of 60 kph. And attempts were made to acquire a foreign high-power diesel engine. However, the only response was coming from Rover with a 620 horsepower engine. The design for the Leo would be continued alongside the development of the TLP-46, the tank destroyer, mind you. The design was finalized in 1948 and it was equipped with a 7.5 cm gun and the Volvo A8B 410 horsepower engine, allowing for a top speed of 55 kph. The tank would be offered to a number of countries. However, no one would end up buying the design. Even though it was never produced and did not get out of the design stage, it was a real blueprint concept, earning itself a real badge. But what about Sweden's futuristic designs of the 1970s? Next, the Udes 14 Alt 5. This study and project was named Udes 14 and was intended to be a turreted tank with comparable weapon effectiveness, weight and cost similar to that of the Udes 03. The tank was intended to have the smallest target area when in a firing position and allowed for maximum frontal protection, mainly for the crew. The tank was to weigh no more than 20 tons and have a low overall height to reduce the target's profile of the tank. It was calculated that the mathematical possible height of the hull would be 1.1 meters, with a total height including the turret of 2.47 meters. This was taller than the Udes 03, which was at 1.75 meters. The front of the hull was intended to be around 11 degrees sloped. There were numerous designs created by Bofors and Hägglunds, either using an autoloader or a manual loading system. The designs were to have hydraulic suspension to enhance their hull-down capabilities. These proposals generally did not go very far. However, they were used in the development of the future Udes 15-16 projects. What we see in-game is the 5th design iteration of the Udes 14 Alt 5, hence the Alt 5. And with that we can say, because the project was seriously considered and designs were formalized, the Udes 14 Alt 15 earns a real rating, although the design in-game remained on paper only. Now let's go on from serious design studies to export dreams. Meet the Lansen C. QSR, it's waiting! A tank developed alongside the Leo as part of a series of designs by Landsverk for export. The Lansen C was a potential Swiss army option and was designed from 1948 to 1951. The tank's final design used an 84mm gun, which was chosen by the Swiss. However, the other designs were all intended to use the 7.5cm PV-Can M43 gun. What we see in game is almost the final design, which had a longer hull with a redesigned front. Given the low profile of the tank, it is believed that this design was chosen to reduce the target size. The Lansen C was not intended to face tanks head on, but rather to strike its enemies and then move away fast enough to not be hit in return. This means the Lansen C would have also been highly mobile and light to accomplish its ambush role. There was real interest in the Lansen C by Pakistan and Israel, which planned on ordering 200 tanks in total. Even full-scale mock-ups were produced as seen here, but the project sadly got discontinued. But that leaves us with a real tag for this tank. Asking the question if this tank is real or fake is kinda dented, but it's part of the Swedish lineup in World of Tanks, so let's have a look at the Stridsvagn 81. The Swedish interest in the Centurion began in the early 1950s, when most Swedish late and post-war designs for a new medium tank have been abandoned. That said, the Swedish also had their interest in the AMX-13. Before the Swedes managed to buy the AMX-13, the British agreed to sell the Centurion to the Swedish army. About 100 Centurion Mark IIIs were shipped to Sweden in late 1953 and entered service in the same year. The tank was named Stridsvagn 81. Fun fact, it was also called Stridsvagn C3 initially. The tank was considered a heavy tank in Sweden, most likely due to the fact that it was 20 tons heavier than the next heaviest Swedish medium tank. What a chonker. A second batch of 300 would be sent in 1956, this time being the Mark V, and armed with the 20-pounder Type B. Other than this, it was identical to the early Mark IIIs. This would also be called the Stridsvagn 81. Aside from mounting of Swedish radios, these tanks would remain in service until 1958. So yes, these ones are actually real, like they literally existed and moved around. Next up, the Udes 16, the Tier 9 Tech 3 Swedish medium tank designed by Bofors. Developed on the back of the Udes 14 project by Hägglunds, the tank was specifically based on the Udes 14E2 and was to be even shorter than its predecessor. It was intended to use a 105mm gun with similar specifications. It was intended to use a 105mm gun with similar specifications to its predecessor. The project for the Udes 16 would be merged with the Bofors Udes 15 project and would become the 1516, hence the name. However, this tank did not get out of the paper stage, except for some high quality design sketches and blueprints. It does earn the real tag, but the next tank, yeah, that's going to be a rough one. Bet you almost forgot the Udes 03 Alt 3, but here it is. Developed in December 1973 as part of the Udes 14 project. The naming game is incorrect by the way and should be Udes 14 Alt 3, but whatever. What we see specifically is a preliminary design by FMV before it was sent out to Hägglunds and Bofors, which came up with the actual designs. This design was not intended to feature hydropneumatic suspension. Interestingly, the actual Udes 03 Alt 3 looks very distinct and different. It has a turret design being reminiscent of the Torn Van. Even though the name is wrong of the tank and the tank only has a few blueprints, it still did exist, earning itself a real tag. So far, Sweden's mediums are grounded in reality, although only on paper most of the time. But what about the top dog? The Udes 1516, following up from the Udes 14 studies, represents further evolutions in Swedish armor thinking, combining elements of the Udes 15 and the Udes 16. It became the main variant of traditional design for Swedish tanks. The Udes 1516 itself was designed in 1975 and was intended to just weigh 26 tons and use a 3-man crew. The tank would have had a 105mm gun and a maximum of 10 degrees of gun depression and 20 degrees of elevation. As with most Swedish designs of the time, the Udes 1516 was extremely low profile, being only 1.9 meters in height in total. As with the Lansen C, the 1516 was not intended to take enemy armor head on, but instead be able to strike enemy vehicles and move quickly to avoid hits in return. There were two versions in this project, being the Udes 1516 and the Udes 1516 TR, with TR standing for Tornrik. The TR was a Udes 1516 turret on an IKV-91 chassis. This was intended to test its performance on a pre-existing platform. This design would differ from the normal 1516 in that it had only 5 degrees of gun depression and no hydraulic suspension. While the idea was good, this design did not go very far. In the end, a full-scale mock-up would be built with some variation of the blueprint design. It is believed that no turret was ever produced. That still makes the Udes 1516 real enough, so it earns itself a real badge. So, are Swedish mediums fake? Based on blueprints, studies and export designs, the answer is, if you agree with Malice's and my interpretation of fake, no. Wargaming has grounded these vehicles in real history, but has added its own twist when needed for gameplay purposes. A massive thank you goes to Malice, which originally made this historic post on Reddit and is a good friend of mine, having supported me to make her post in a video. Another thanks goes to SB15, which did the initial research, and a big thanks goes to the viewers which participated to get me some footage. With that, the only thing left to say is, if you want more deep dives like this, subscribe for the truth behind the tanks you play with every day. Thank you so much for watching and see you around. Cheers.